The conference room aboard the Vexarian flagship stretched wider than most human buildings. Crystal walls reflected the light of 1,000 stars as the Supreme War Council gathered to discuss the newest discovery. General Thexnor stood at the center, his forearms gesturing dramatically at the holographic display floating before the assembled officers. "Look at them," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "The humans. They call themselves a spacefaring civilization, yet observe their military installations. The hologram showed a human colony world. Bases dotted the landscape, surrounded by thick walls and ditches. Rows of armored vehicles sat in neat formations. Soldiers marched in training exercises across open fields. Everything existed on the ground, stuck to the surface like insects on tree bark. Commander Velix leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "They have orbital stations, General. Their space fleet is small but functional." "Functional," Thexnor repeated with a laugh. "Yes, like a child's toy is functional. But look at where they place their strength. Ground forces, tanks that crawl on metal tracks, artillery that cannot even leave the surface. They dig holes in the dirt and call them fortifications." The other officers joined in the laughter. The Vexarian Empire had abandoned ground warfare 3,000 years ago. Why fight on a planet's surface when anti-gravity technology allowed forces to strike from above? Their hover tanks floated effortlessly over any terrain. Their fighters moved in 3 dimensions, never constrained by mountains or rivers. Energy shields protected their forces from above and below. "Perhaps they are a young species," offered Admiral Krenth. "They will learn." "They will learn today," Thexnor replied. "Our scouts have completed their analysis. The humans control 47 worlds, small colonies mostly. Their largest military force numbers perhaps 3 million soldiers. We can sweep them aside in weeks." The hologram shifted to show intercepted human transmissions. Military briefings, training videos, tactical discussions. Everything focused on ground combat. Tank formations, infantry tactics, artillery coordination. There was almost nothing about space combat beyond. Basic defensive maneuvers. "They fight like our ancestors did," observed Commander Velix. "Before we evolved beyond such primitive methods," Thexnor nodded. "Exactly. Which is why the Emperor has authorized me to deliver an ultimatum. The humans will surrender 12 worlds as tribute, or we will take them by force." The council chamber fell silent for a moment. Then Velix spoke again. "General, perhaps we should study them further. Sometimes species develop unusual capabilities." "Unusual?" Thexnor's laugh echoed through the chamber. "What capability could ground crawlers possess that would threaten the greatest empire in the galaxy?" "No, we will proceed as planned." 3 days later, the Vexarian delegation arrived at the human diplomatic station orbiting New Carthage. Ambassador Chen Wei met them in the reception hall, a simple room by Vexarian standards. The human was short and plain, wearing a dark suit instead of military armor. "Welcome," Chen said in perfect Vexarian. "We are honored by your visit." Thexnor towered over the human ambassador. "Your language skills are adequate. Perhaps your military planning could learn from your diplomatic corps." Chen's expression did not change. "Perhaps. We have observed your forces," Thexnor continued. "Your tactics are quaint. Tell me, do your soldiers enjoy crawling in the mud? Is there a cultural significance to fighting on the ground like animals?" The other Vexarian delegates chuckled. Chen simply nodded. "We have found that controlling the ground gives us certain advantages." "Advantages," Thexnor repeated. "Yes, I suppose when one cannot master the sky, one must take pride in the dirt. But let us discuss why we are here. The Vexarian Empire requires tribute from new species entering our territory. You will surrender 12 of your worlds. Your populations may remain, but they will serve the Empire." Chen folded his hands calmly. "We respectfully decline." The room temperature seemed to drop. Thexnor's 4 eyes widened. "You decline? You have seen our fleet. You have seen our technology. Your primitive ground forces cannot stop us." "Perhaps," Chen said. "But we will not surrender our worlds without attempting to defend them." "Attempting," Thexnor said slowly. "Yes, you will attempt. And you will fail. Your tanks cannot fly, Ambassador. Your artillery cannot reach orbit. Your soldiers cannot fight what they cannot catch. We will hover above your forces and reduce them to ash." Chen met the general's gaze without flinching. "You may find that more difficult than you anticipate." "Is that a threat?" Thexnor leaned closer. "From a species that builds its fortresses in the dirt?" "It is a statement of fact," Chen replied. We have prepared for many scenarios. Thexnor straightened, a cruel smile crossing his face. Then prepare for conquest. You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, we will demonstrate why ground forces are relics of a primitive age. The Vexarian delegation departed. As the airlock sealed behind them, one of Chen's aides approached. Ambassador, they truly believe we are helpless. Chen watched the Vexarian shuttle depart through the viewport. Yes, they have forgotten something important. What is that, sir? Gravity is not a weakness, Chen said quietly. It is a constant. And we have spent 10,000 years learning to use it as a weapon. 5 days later, the Vexarian armada arrived at New Carthage. 200 ships filled the orbit, blotting out the sun. General Thexnor stood on his flagship's bridge, looking down at the human colony below. Begin bombardment of their orbital defenses, he ordered. Once we control the space around this world, we will show them what happens to species who refuse the Empire. The human defense platforms fought bravely but briefly. Within 3 hours, the Vexarian fleet had complete orbital superiority. Thexnor watched with satisfaction as his forces prepared to descend. Deploy the first wave, he commanded. Let us see how their precious ground forces fare against warriors of the sky. The sky above New Carthage turned dark with descending Vexarian craft. Hover tanks floated down on cushions of anti-gravity energy, their sleek forms gleaming in the afternoon sun. Fighter craft swooped and circled, their pilots eager for combat. The invasion force numbered 50,000 soldiers, more than enough to crush the 20,000 human defenders stationed on the planet. General Thexnor watched from orbit as his forces took position around the capital city. The humans had evacuated the civilians already. The streets stood empty, buildings silent. A few automated defenses fired from rooftops but were quickly eliminated. Broadcast the surrender demand, Thexnor ordered. His communications officer complied. The message went out on all frequencies in multiple languages. Surrender now and be spared. Resist and be destroyed. It was standard procedure. Though Thexnor expected no response, he was correct. The humans remained silent. Ground Commander Xylith, you may begin the occupation, Thexnor said. On the surface, Commander Xylith directed his hover tanks through the empty streets. Everything seemed almost too easy. His forces moved in formation, anti-gravity drives humming softly. The vehicles could cross any obstacle, float over any barrier. They were untouchable. Sir, we have visual on human forces, reported one of his scouts. They appear to be retreating from the city, heading inland. Xylith brought up the tactical display. Indeed, thermal signatures showed human vehicles moving away from the capital, traveling east toward a region of forests and hills. The humans were running. Pursue them, Xylith ordered. Do not let them establish new defensive positions. The Vexarian force left the city behind, following the retreating humans. The landscape changed gradually from urban sprawl to suburban homes, then to farmland and finally to wilderness. The hover tanks moved effortlessly over it all, maintaining perfect formation above the terrain. Thexnor watched from above, satisfaction warming his chest. They run like prey animals, he commented to his bridge crew. Perhaps we should have offered them a chance to join the Empire as laborers. They clearly have no stomach for war. But Commander Velik, standing nearby, seemed less certain. General, the terrain they are leading us into is disadvantageous for anti-gravity systems. The forest will interfere with our sensor networks. The hills create visual barriers. Disadvantageous for us? Thexnor laughed. We fly, Commander. Terrain is irrelevant. That is the entire point of anti-gravity warfare. Velik said nothing more, but her expression remained troubled. On the ground, Commander Xylith was beginning to share her concerns. The forests were thicker than expected. His hover tanks were designed for open warfare, not navigating between trees. They could rise above the canopy, but that exposed them to potential anti-aircraft fire. Staying low meant reduced visibility. Sir, the humans have stopped retreating, reported his sensor officer. They have taken positions approximately 30 kilometers ahead. Finally, Xylith said. Prepare for engagement. All units advance in assault formation. The Vexarian force pushed forward, emerging from the forest into a wide clearing. The space stretched for several kilometers, surrounded by hills on 3 sides. At the far end, human positions were visible. Earthen berms, camouflage netting, and what appeared to be dug-in vehicles. Xylith studied the defensive line through his view screen. They have buried themselves like rodents, he observed. How do they expect to maneuver from static positions? One of his tactical officers spoke up. Commander, this terrain formation is unusual. We are in a valley with limited exit points. So? Xylith replied. We can simply fly out if needed. But we will not need to. Prepare main weapons. Target their defensive positions. The hover tanks powered up their energy cannons. In moments, they would reduce the human fortifications to slag. But before Xylith could give the firing order, his sensor officer called out urgently. Sir, massive seismic activity detected. Multiple sources converging on our position. Seismic? Xylith checked his instruments. The ground was indeed vibrating. But anti-gravity vehicles did not touch the ground. Why would seismic activity matter? Then he understood. Something was moving underground. Multiple somethings. Large somethings. All units gain altitude, he ordered. Rise above potential ground-based threats. The hover tanks began to lift higher, their anti-gravity drives straining. But the terrain was wrong somehow. The hills around them seemed to be generating interference. Electromagnetic interference. His displays flickered. Sir, our sensors are being jammed, reported the sensor officer. Communications with orbital command are intermittent. From the human defensive line, something emerged. At first, Xylith thought it was a bunker rising from the earth. Then he realized it was a vehicle. A massive armored vehicle on metal tracks, covered in reactive armor and bristling with weapons. Its turret rotated toward his formation with mechanical precision. More appeared. Dozens of them. They emerged from concealed positions, from beneath camouflage nets, from underground ramps. Tracked vehicles, all of them. Primitive by Vexarian standards. But there were so many. Those are their tanks? Someone said over the command channel. They move on the ground? Xylith felt a moment of relief. All units engage. Show them why we abandoned such primitive designs. His hover tanks opened fire. Energy beams lanced across the clearing. But the human tanks did not explode. Their armor was thick, layered. Some beams reflected off angled surfaces. Others were absorbed by reactive plating that detonated outward, dissipating the energy. And then the human tanks fired back. The sound was like nothing Xylith had ever heard. Not the clean hum of energy weapons, but a physical concussion that shook the air. Kinetic weapons. Solid projectiles fired at incredible velocity. The first shell struck a hover tank to Xylith's left. The energy shield flickered, designed to deflect energy weapons and light impacts. But the depleted uranium round punched through the shield as if it were paper. Continuing through the armor and out the other side, the hover tank exploded, its anti-gravity drive failing catastrophically. More human weapons opened fire. Artillery hidden in the hills began raining shells down on the Vexarian formation. Not energy weapons, but high-explosive projectiles that fell with brutal accuracy. Missiles streaked from the tree line, guided by targeting systems the Vexarians had not detected. Xylith's world became chaos. His hover tanks were dying. The energy shields were useless against kinetic weapons. The armor, designed to be lightweight for anti-gravity systems, could not stop solid projectiles traveling at hypersonic speeds. Retreat, he ordered. All units fall back to the forest. But the humans had prepared for that too. As the Vexarian forces turned to flee, human tanks advanced from both flanks. They had hidden entire formations in the hills. The Vexarians were surrounded. Fighter craft tried to intervene from above, swooping down to provide air support. Surface-to-air missiles rose to meet them, dozens at once. The fighters scattered, their pilots suddenly defensive rather than aggressive. Xylith tried to contact orbital command. This is Ground Commander Xylith. We are taking heavy casualties. Request immediate air support and orbital strike authorization, but the electromagnetic jamming was too strong. His message broke apart, turned to static. He was alone on a battlefield against an enemy that should not have been able to touch him. A human tank rolled past his position, its massive gun tracking another target. Xylith could see soldiers through viewports, humans working together with mechanical efficiency. They were not running. They were not afraid, they were hunting. Colonel Maria Santos watched the battle unfold from her command tank. The view screen showed the Vexarian hover tanks trying to escape the kill zone, their sleek forms turning frantically. They were fast, she had to admit, but speed meant nothing when you were surrounded and outgunned. Alpha Company, close the northern exit, she ordered. Bravo Company, maintain pressure from the west. Do not let them reorganize. Her tank rumbled forward, its tracks gripping the earth with mechanical certainty. The M1A5 Abrams 6X was the latest in a long line of main battle tanks stretching back over 200 years. Humans had refined this design through countless wars, endless iterations. Every angle of armor was calculated. Every system was redundant. Every weakness had been tested and corrected. The Vexarians had abandoned this type of warfare. They had forgotten its lessons. Target acquired, her gunner reported. Hover tank, range 2,000 meters. Fire, Santos said calmly. The main gun fired with a thunderous crack. The depleted uranium round left the barrel at over 1,700 meters per second. It covered the distance in slightly more than a second, striking the Vexarian hover tank dead center. The round punched through the thin armor like it was aluminum foil. The hover tank exploded, its anti-gravity drive failing. The wreckage crashed to the ground, something it had never been designed to do. The impact crumpled the remaining structure. Target destroyed, the gunner confirmed, acquiring next target. Around them, the rest of the armored division was performing similar executions. The Vexarians had expected a ground force that would be helpless against aerial attack. Instead, they found an army that had spent millennia learning to fight enemies with air superiority. Every human tank carried anti-aircraft systems. Every infantry squad had shoulder-fired missiles. The artillery batteries hidden in the hills could track and engage aerial targets. The humans had prepared for an enemy that controlled the skies because that was the only type of enemy they had ever prepared for. Colonel, artillery reports all fire missions successful, her communications officer said. Enemy forces are fragmented and attempting to withdraw. Santos checked her tactical display. The Vexarian formation had collapsed. Individual vehicles were trying to escape in different directions. Some attempted to gain altitude rising above the hills. Human anti-aircraft batteries tracked them easily, sending missiles streaking upward. All units begin cleanup operations, Santos ordered. Focus fire on command vehicles. Disable their coordination. Her tank advanced with the others, a wall of armor rolling across the battlefield. The Vexarian hover tanks tried to fight back, their energy weapons flashing. But energy shields were designed for energy weapons. The human tanks used kinetic rounds, and kinetic rounds did not care about energy shields. A Vexarian fighter screamed overhead, trying to strafe the human position. Surface-to-air missiles launched from 3 different locations converging on the craft. The pilot dodged the first 2, but the third caught his wing. The fighter spiraled into the ground, adding another plume of smoke to the battlefield. Commander Xylith's hover tank limped toward the forest edge, its anti-gravity drive damaged. Santos tracked it with her turret. She could end it now, add another kill to her tally, but she held fire. Communications broadcast on all Vexarian frequencies, she said. Inform them that any unit that powers down weapons and remains stationary will not be fired upon. There was a pause. Then her communications officer nodded. Message sent, Colonel. They waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, Vexarian hover tanks began to settle to the ground, their weapons powering down. Some tried to flee and were destroyed, but most chose survival. Santos surveyed the battlefield. Burning wreckage dotted the landscape. The ground was torn from artillery impacts and missile explosions. The Vexarians had come with 50,000 soldiers. Perhaps half would survive to be taken prisoner. Combat efficiency exceeding projections, her tactical officer reported. Enemy casualties 90% higher than anticipated. Our casualties minimal, mostly from lucky shots. Santos nodded slowly. The Vexarians had thought ground combat was primitive. They had forgotten that primitive did not mean ineffective. A sharpened stick could kill just as surely as a laser rifle if applied correctly. And humanity had spent its entire existence learning how to apply force correctly. All units, establish perimeter around enemy survivors, Santos ordered. Medical teams forward to provide aid to enemy wounded. We follow the conventions of war. As her crew carried out her orders, Santos opened a communication channel to Orbital Command. General Thexnor's face appeared, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. Colonel Santos, he said, his voice tight. You have destroyed my ground forces. Yes, Santos replied. You attacked our world. We defended it. With primitive tracked vehicles, Thexnor said, almost to himself. How? Our technology is superior. Our shields, our anti-gravity systems, our energy weapons. We have every advantage. Santos allowed herself a small smile. General, you have advantages in mobility and speed. But you gave up armor to achieve those advantages. You gave up the ability to use terrain. You gave up the stability of a ground-based firing platform. And you forgot something crucial. What? Thexnor demanded. Gravity is not just something to overcome, Santos said. It is a weapon. Every round we fire is accelerated by gravity. Every position we take is anchored by gravity. We do not fight against it. We use it. Thexnor stared at her for a long moment. Your tactics are thousands of years old. We evolved beyond this. No, Santos corrected. You forgot this. We perfected it. Every human war, every human conflict, every battle we have ever fought has been on the ground. We have never had the luxury of abandoning terrestrial warfare, so we became the absolute best at it. The general's expression hardened. One battle does not win a war, Colonel. We have 1,000 ships in orbit. We can reduce your planet to ash from space. You could, Santos agreed. But then you would gain nothing. No resources, no territory, no tribute. Just a dead rock floating in space. Is that what your empire wants? Thexnor said nothing. You came here expecting an easy conquest, Santos continued. You thought ground forces were obsolete. But here's the truth, General. You cannot hold a planet from orbit. You cannot control a population from the sky. You cannot extract resources with ships alone. Eventually, you must land forces. And when you do, we will be waiting. The channel went silent for a moment. Then Thexnor spoke again, his voice cold. We shall see, Colonel. We shall see. The transmission ended. Santos leaned back in her seat, suddenly tired. This had been just one battle. The war was far from over. But the Vexarians had learned an important lesson today. Never underestimate an enemy who specializes in what you have forgotten. Her gunner turned in his seat. Colonel, what do you think happens next? Santos looked out at the battlefield, at the captured Vexarian equipment and the prisoners being processed. They will adapt, she said. They will change tactics, bring more forces, try different approaches. But they will never again dismiss ground combat as primitive. And us, ma'am. We do what we have always done, Santos replied. We dig in. We prepare. We make every meter of ground cost them dearly, because in the end, wars are not won in space. They are won on the ground, one piece of territory at a time. Her tank's engine rumbled, ready to move to the next position. Around them, the rest of the division was already establishing defensive lines, preparing for the next assault. The Vexarians controlled the sky, but humanity owned the ground, and they would not give it up without a fight that the Empire would never forget. The Imperial War Council convened an emergency session. General Thexnor stood before them, his forearms held stiffly at his sides. Around him, holographic displays showed the disaster at New Carthage from every angle. Burning hover tanks, crashed fighters, thousands of casualties. Emperor Vexthor himself attended, his presence making everyone in the room tense. He was ancient, his carapace scarred from wars fought when most species in the galaxy were still primitive. He watched the recordings in silence. 50,000 soldiers, the Emperor said finally, defeated by 20,000 primitives with tracked vehicles. Thexnor bowed his head. Yes, Exalted One, I underestimated their capabilities. You did more than underestimate, said War Mistress Krell, one of the Empire's most decorated commanders. You ignored every tactical principle we have established over 3 millennia. You placed forces in a confined space. You failed to scout properly. You assumed technological superiority meant certain victory. The humans led us into a trap, Thexnor protested. Their defensive planning was sophisticated beyond what we expected from a ground-based force. That is the point, Krell replied coldly. They are a ground-based force. They have spent their entire history learning to fight on planetary surfaces. Of course, their defensive planning is sophisticated. It is all they do. The Emperor raised one hand, silencing the argument. Recriminations are pointless. What matters is our response. General Thexnor, you are relieved of command. War Mistress Krell, you will take charge of operations against humanity. Krell bowed. Yes, Exalted One. We will not make the same mistakes, the Emperor continued. Deploy the Void Legion to 3 human worlds simultaneously. Avoid their prepared kill zones. Stay at high altitude. Use orbital bombardment to destroy their ground forces before landing. Show them that one tactical victory does not change the fundamental superiority of the Empire. Krell studied the tactical displays. The humans have 47 colonies. If we take 3, they may surrender the rest to preserve their population. Exactly, the Emperor said. Begin immediately. 3 weeks later, the Void Legion struck. These were not regular forces, but elite units trained for difficult campaigns. They had studied the defeat at New Carthage, analyzed human tactics, and adapted their approach. On the mining world of New Hamburg, they stayed at high altitude, using long-range bombardment to target human defensive positions. The humans responded with anti-aircraft fire, but the Vexarians remained beyond effective range. They pounded the human positions for days, reducing fortifications to rubble. But when they finally descended to occupy the destroyed bases, they found them empty. The humans had evacuated through underground tunnels, and waiting for the Vexarians were weapons they had not anticipated. Mobile fortresses emerged from concealed bunkers. These were not normal tanks but massive vehicles the size of small buildings, covered in meters of composite armor. Their guns were not standard cannons but rail guns that fired projectiles at velocities that made previous engagements look gentle. The mobile fortresses advanced slowly but inexorably. Vexarian energy weapons scorched their armor but could not penetrate. The fortresses fired back, each shot destroying a hover tank or downing a fighter. The Vexarians tried to maneuver around them, but the fortresses were positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. On the agricultural world of Prairie's End, the Vexarians encountered a different strategy. The human settlements were spread across thousands of kilometers of open grassland. When the Void Legion landed, they found not concentrated armies but dispersed forces everywhere. Small groups of tanks moved independently, hitting Vexarian units and disappearing before response forces could arrive. There were hundreds of these groups, maybe thousands. The Vexarians' sophisticated targeting systems became overwhelmed, trying to track so many individual threats. Every time they concentrated forces to eliminate one human unit, 3 others would attack from different directions. The humans used the terrain perfectly, knowing every hill and valley. They struck at supply lines, command posts, communication relays. The Vexarians controlled the sky but could not find the enemy to fight. On the industrial colony of New Shanghai, humanity revealed yet another adaptation. The urban environment made aerial superiority nearly useless. Buildings blocked lines of sight. Underground facilities provided endless hiding spots. The humans turned the entire city into a fortress. Vexarian forces pushed into the city, clearing it street by street. But every building might contain anti-tank weapons. Every intersection might hide a kill zone. The hover tank's mobility was useless in narrow streets. They could not maneuver effectively, could not use their speed advantage. Human infantry worked in close coordination with armored vehicles, using tactics refined through centuries of urban combat. They let the Vexarians advance, then cut them off from behind. They destroyed buildings to block routes. They used the rubble itself as weapons, collapsing structures onto enemy formations. War Mistress Krell watched reports from all 3 worlds with growing frustration. They adapt to every environment, she said to her staff. On the mining world, they use heavy armor. On the agricultural world, they use mobility. In the city, they use the terrain itself. How do they do this? Her intelligence officer pulled up historical data on humanity. War Mistress, the humans have fought each other for their entire recorded history. Thousands of wars. Millions of battles. Every type of terrain, every type of enemy. Their entire civilization has been shaped by ground combat. But other species also had wars before becoming spacefaring, Krell objected. Not like this, the officer replied. Most species abandoned terrestrial warfare once they achieved anti-gravity technology. The humans achieved spaceflight but never stopped fighting on the ground. They kept developing tank designs, kept refining tactics. They never stopped preparing for ground war. Krell studied the data. The numbers were staggering. Humanity had designed over 300 different tank models in their history. They had written thousands of military manuals on ground combat. They had universities dedicated to studying warfare. They weaponized their entire culture, she said quietly. In a sense, the intelligence officer agreed. They turned ground combat into an art form. And we forgot it entirely. The casualties mounted. The Void Legion was the Empire's finest, but they were losing soldiers at an unsustainable rate. Krell made the decision that Thexnor had not been willing to make. Pull back from all 3 worlds, she ordered. Establish orbital blockades but do not attempt to occupy the surface. Her staff stared at her. War Mistress, the Emperor expects us to take these worlds. The Emperor expects results, Krell replied. We cannot take these worlds with current tactics. The humans are too well prepared, too experienced in ground combat. We need to develop new approaches. She opened a communication channel to the Imperial Palace. The Emperor's face appeared, his expression unreadable. War Mistress, I am told you are withdrawing. Yes, Exalted One. We have inflicted casualties but cannot achieve occupation. The humans are more capable than initial assessments suggested. There was a long pause. Then the Emperor said something that shocked everyone listening. Perhaps we should have listened to their ambassador. He tried to warn us, Krell bowed. What are your orders, Exalted One? Continue the blockades, the Emperor said. Cut off their supply lines. But begin developing ground combat doctrines. If we are to defeat the humans, we must learn to fight them on their terms. And we must do it quickly, before the rest of the galaxy realizes the greatest empire in the galaxy can be challenged by species we once mocked. The transmission ended. Krell turned to her staff. You heard the Emperor. We are going back to school, and our teachers will be the enemy we once dismissed as primitive. The war continued for 8 months. Neither side could achieve decisive victory. The Vexarian Empire controlled space around human worlds, blockading trade and supplies. But humanity controlled every planetary surface, making occupation impossible. The stalemate was costing both civilizations dearly. In the Imperial Palace, Emperor Vexthor reviewed casualty reports with growing concern. The Void Legion had lost 30% of its strength. Regular forces had lost even more. And still the humans held every world they had started with. The treasury is depleting rapidly, his finance minister reported. The war consumes resources faster than we can produce them. If we continue at this rate, we will face economic collapse within 2 years. The Emperor looked at War Mistress Krell. Your assessment? The humans cannot break our orbital blockades, Krell said carefully. But we cannot take their worlds. Every attempt ends in unacceptable casualties. We have tried bombardment, siege tactics, massed assaults. Nothing works. They are simply too good at ground combat. Then we are at an impasse, the Emperor said. There may be another option, Krell replied. The humans have been sending diplomatic signals. They are willing to negotiate. Negotiate? The Emperor's voice carried disbelief. After we declared war on them? They are pragmatic, Krell said. They know they cannot break the blockade. We know we cannot take their worlds. Both sides are suffering. A negotiated peace benefits everyone. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. Arrange a meeting, but do so carefully. The Empire cannot appear weak. The meeting was held on a neutral station orbiting an uninhabited system. Ambassador Chen Wei led the human delegation. General Thexnor, restored to a position of advisory importance after his warnings proved correct, accompanied War Mistress Krell. They met in a simple conference room. No grand displays, no shows of force. Just representatives of two civilizations looking for a way to end a war neither could win. Chen spoke first. Thank you for agreeing to meet. We believe there is a path to peace that preserves the dignity of both our peoples. Krell studied the human ambassador. He looked the same as during their first meeting, calm and composed. What do you propose? Mutual recognition of sovereignty, Chen said. The Empire acknowledges human worlds as independent territories. In exchange, we agree to a non-aggression pact. No human forces will enter Imperial space without invitation. No Imperial forces will enter human space without permission. That is all? Thexnor asked. No tribute? No reparations? What would be the point? Chen replied. You cannot collect tribute from worlds you cannot occupy. We cannot demand reparations we cannot enforce. Let us simply acknowledge reality. Your empire is strong in space. Our forces are strong on the ground. Neither of us can eliminate the other without costs that would destroy us both. Krell leaned back in her seat. You knew this from the beginning, didn't you? You knew we would underestimate you. Chen allowed himself a small smile. We suspected. Your initial approach suggested you had forgotten the fundamentals of ground warfare. We used that assumption to our advantage. By letting us think you were weak, Thexnor said, understanding dawning. Your ambassador's words, your lack of offense when we mocked you. It was calculated, partially, Chen admitted, but also honest. We were weak in space. We still are. We simply made sure you understood too late that space superiority does not guarantee victory. Krell found herself respecting the human. You fought well. Your tactics were sophisticated, your soldiers skilled. If I may ask, how did you develop such expertise in ground combat? By never having a choice, Chen replied. Humanity has fought itself for thousands of years. We never had a superior force from the sky to rely on. We had to become excellent at ground warfare or destroy ourselves. We chose excellence. And now you are willing to make peace, the Emperor's voice said from a communication screen. He had been listening to the entire conversation. Despite our aggression, despite our insults, you offer a reasonable settlement. Chen nodded to the screen. Exalted One, we are willing to make peace because we recognize that your empire is powerful and will exist for a very long time. We would prefer to coexist rather than fight indefinitely, but make no mistake, if you attack our worlds again, we will defend them, and the cost will always be unacceptable. The Emperor was quiet. Then he said, we accept your terms. The Empire recognizes human sovereignty over your 47 worlds. We establish a non-aggression pact of 50 years duration, renewable by mutual consent. Is this acceptable? It is, Chen said. Then let it be recorded, the Emperor said. The war between the Vexarian Empire and humanity is ended. The formal treaty took weeks to draft and sign. But from that moment, the shooting stopped. The blockades lifted. Trade began cautiously between the two civilizations. 6 months after the treaty signing, Colonel Maria Santos received unexpected visitors at her base on New Carthage. A Vexarian shuttle landed, carrying War Mistress Krell and a delegation of military officers. Santos met them on the landing pad. War Mistress, this is unexpected. Colonel Santos, Krell said formally. I have a request that may seem strange. We would like permission to study your military academy, to learn how you train your ground forces. Santos raised her eyebrows. You want to learn our tactics? Yes, Krell said. The Emperor has authorized the creation of a ground warfare division within the Imperial military. We have the technology but not the knowledge. We would like to study with those who are the galaxy's experts. Santos considered this. You want us to teach you how to defeat us? No, Krell replied. We want you to teach us what you already know. The galaxy is vast. There will be other conflicts, other wars. The Empire needs to relearn what we forgot, and you are the best teachers available. Santos looked at General Thexnor, who had accompanied Krell. General, you were the one who mocked us most strongly. Thexnor bowed his head. I was a fool. I let arrogance blind me to reality. I have learned from that mistake. And what did you learn? Santos asked. That technology is not the same as capability, Thexnor said. That newer is not always better. That sometimes old ways persist because they work, and that underestimating an enemy is the fastest path to defeat. Santos smiled slightly. Those are good lessons. Very well, War Mistress. We will share our knowledge. But in exchange, perhaps you could teach us about your anti-gravity systems. Our engineers are very curious. A fair trade, Krell agreed. They walked together toward the base, former enemies beginning a new relationship based on mutual respect. In the distance, human tanks rolled across the training grounds, their tracks leaving marks in the earth. One of the young Vexarian officers watched them with fascination. War Mistress, why do they still use tracks? We have anti-gravity technology that they could adapt. Krell looked at the tanks, then at Colonel Santos. Colonel, would you like to answer that? Santos nodded. Lieutenant, we use tracks because they work. They work in mud, in sand, in snow, in any terrain. They work when our power systems fail. They work when electromagnetic weapons try to disable us. They work because they are simple, reliable, and proven. We have newer technology too, but we never abandon something that works. That is the human way, Krell added to her officer. They do not discard the old just because the new exists. They keep what works and add to it. That is why they are so dangerous. They have centuries of accumulated knowledge, all of it still relevant. The young officer nodded slowly, beginning to understand. That evening, in the Academy's main lecture hall, Santos stood before a mixed audience of human and Vexarian officers. Behind her, a holographic display showed the Battle of New Carthage from multiple angles. Welcome, she said, to the first lesson in combined arms warfare. Today we will discuss why controlling the ground matters, how to use terrain as a weapon, and why gravity is your friend, not your enemy. The Vexarians leaned forward, taking notes. They had come to learn from a species they once mocked. And they were discovering that in warfare, as in life, those who forget history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. In the back of the room, Ambassador Chen Wei watched with quiet satisfaction. The war had been costly, but it had taught both sides valuable lessons. The Vexarians had learned humility. Humanity had learned it could stand against galactic powers, and most importantly, both sides had learned that respect was earned through capability, not just through technology or size. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had secured its place in it, one hard-fought battle at a time.